Good afternoon, everyone. Just a few minutes until we get going, so I'm going to let everybody in. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the second of our Falls Awareness webinars this week. So it's been Falls Awareness Week, and we started on, I think it was Monday now. I can't remember on around how we can look at reducing severity of falls, promote better health outcomes, and some of that will be will come through this webinar as well. But what we're going to focus on today is the World Falls Guidance and what that can mean to you and in your organisations to help prevent falls. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Verity. I manage the service where we focus on falls, but also the bigger picture of prevention and enablement. You will get the slides either today or by the end of this week. You'll get the recording as well. And as this is a webinar, you don't have access to your mics or videos. You'll be pleased to know, I'm sure. But you can use the question and answer box on Zoom and the chat box as well. So please use those. Make sure you get as much out of today's hour session. There is loads to get through. So I'm gonna get started. Okay, so many of you do know, similar to what I shared at the beginning of the week, again, when we think about falls prevention, we know we cannot reduce them down to nothing. We're supporting very complex people with long-term health conditions. So actually, it needs to be how you're evidencing, how you're preventing and managing falls correctly. And part of that is understanding actually what is evidence-based, what is out there to ensure that we're doing the right things. And I know what it's like. Sometimes you'll come to me and you'll say, oh, is there anything else that we can do? Sometimes there isn't. And sometimes we have to take that step back and sometimes look at what the evidence says. So hopefully that's going to be nice and clear for you today. So what we're going through, we're going to go through, of course, current world falls guidance. Now it's huge, that document. I will send it to you after the session. It's quite big. There is categories for care homes, there's categories for the community, there's categories for inpatient falls as well, so you can easily navigate where you need to get to. But with the falls guidelines, it's going to help us understand the evidence-based research. So today I've had to pick out certain things to make sure we can get through within an hour. So we're going to look at exercise. We are going to look at we're going to look at Parkinson's, we're going to look at sedentary behaviour and other falls risk factors and what the evidence says and what we should be doing. So that's going to help you ensuring that we're promoting as, best health outcomes as we can for those people that you support. Okay, so what is it? You may have seen it, you may have not. It came out 2022, and it's a set of evidence and an expert consensus-based falls prevention and management recommendations applicable for older adults for the use by healthcare and other professionals. And it considers lots of things in this document, but one of them that I really loved and I put in here is around a person-centered approach, and that includes the perspectives of older adults with lived experience, caregivers, and other stakeholders. And that's really, really important because with falls prevention, history of falls, we look at, you might just say to me, right, sensor mats, call bells, footwear, clothing, etc. But actually, sometimes with that, we forget about the person who's falling. We forget about what they want, what their needs are. So it comes back to that person-centered and that enabling care. And I think that's important to note. So what they say, all of these people that have come together and written the guidelines, is that we believe that these guidelines will contribute to improving the health and well-being of older adults globally. Healthy aging, and that's really important because that's going to very much link to frailty, which we're going to touch on, I should say, towards the end of the session, is healthy aging relies on the functional ability to be or to do what you have reason to value. And that then links into what that person wants to achieve, their values, their beliefs, their goals. And again, that's linking back into person-centered care. And that functional ability, having those skills or regaining those skills to, do the things that they enjoy. And that's what we should really, really focus on throughout falls. And sometimes it doesn't get looked at. So I was so happy when I firstly read these guidelines, because it is everything that us at HCPA are trying to promote across all care topics, not just falls, but everything. There's that link to prevention, isn't there? So they also aim to reduce the incidence of falls and related injuries. That's what we all want, of course. So if you didn't watch the beginning of the week's webinar, please do watch that because we focus on severity. Fractures and head injuries and enabling preserved functional mobility would help contribute to achieving, reducing those incidents of falls and those injuries. And as I said, that's everything we're trying to do as part of prevention and enablement, but also, absolutely wider care topics too. So again, little bit of just a reminder. You may, if you joined us again at the beginning of the week, we're just going to touch on the multifactorial risk assessment to begin with, because that's the first step that the guidance talks about. So we know anybody in care homes, number one, should be considered to have a multifactorial risk assessment. Anybody at high risk, so if you're in the community, should be, if you're high risk, offered a comprehensive, again, multifactorial risk assessment with a view to co-design and implement personalised, so that key word there, interventions. So this is also within the NICE guidance, and that's been there, I think, since 2013, when the NICE guidance came out with falls. So what we have to do is we have to manage the many of the risk factors that there are. And if you've seen the multifactorial risk assessment, you know how many there are. But actually, we want to look at what we can do to have wider benefits beyond falls prevention. So here we're linking back to outcomes, but to help improve physical and mental health. That's what we want, functioning and quality of life. So, and that links in, we know those falls are going to happen. So how can we really promote physical and mental health? And that's how we need to look at that bigger picture. And hopefully that's what, this webinar, the first one, can help you with. So step one, yes, is the risk assessment. Not going to spend too much time on this. So as we know, multifactorial risk assessments they're needed. Anybody in care home, and also high risk in the community too. Once we've identified the risks, and of course, the more somebody has, the more at risk they are, then we could then modify approaches for interventions that may be needed, that link to their medical conditions and also can be linked with their likelihood of falling. Those at intermediate risk, and I will explain what this means in a second, should be offered exercise, referrals for health professionals such as physios, and have to improve balance and strength, because balance, as we know, is the only way to improve it. We're not going to improve our balance by staying seated. But all older adults, generally at high risk, must be offered this risk assessment and then tailored interventions. So you might be asking me, what's low risk, what's high, what's intermediate? So low risk is someone who hasn't fallen in the past year. And the goal is just primary prevention. So then you might suggest exercise, you might look at falls education, you might look at linking in with the community. So they haven't fallen in the last year. Intermediate risk of falls means somebody who has gait and balance impaired. So you've assessed for that, and they have fallen in the last year. And we know education, again, should be part of this, but we're going to have specific interventions in there. And then high risk is somebody who has had 2 or more falls in the last year, risk of frailty, potentially had a really bad injury with one of those falls, and they couldn't get up from the floor. They could have not had consciousness. They could have also had a fainting episode. But generally, if anybody's had that serious injury and they've fallen in the last 2 years, then we're looking at that high risk. And this is where those specific interventions come into play. So as we said, if we just think back to those first few slides, goals, linking back to person-centered interventions, we're really trying to look at that bigger picture, mental health, physical health. There will be things that will not be in your falls risk assessment. And my job is to try and change that to ensure that you are considering everything to promote that better quality of life. So you may have seen this before. So a few things in green I'm used to seeing in risk assessments. Balance and gait, yes, or mobility will be in there. Muscle strength, specifically strength, not always. Can somebody get up from a chair? Can they, do they have, sometimes it can be measured by grip strength, but how are they, walking around, or how long can they go for, etc. Walking aids, we know any equipment that they need. Footwear and foot problems, fear of falling, vitamin D, I don't see that very often, and vitamin D can be linked to osteoporosis. So osteoporosis might be in there, but bone health we have to think about. Dizziness and vestibular impairment, so like your inner ears. Vision, we hear, hearing, we know. Functional ability, now this will be in other parts of your care plan, but it should be considered as part of falls as well. So activities of daily living, their goals, their values, their beliefs, and their priorities should be linked into falls. So again, triangulating that across. Cognition, delirium, the environment, but not only the risk assessment environment, their behaviour and what environment they need, or what environment maybe triggers any feelings of distress. We see hypertension, urinary incontinence, cardiovascular disorders, contributing diseases, including Parkinson's. You might have a stroke in there. You might have arthritis in there as well. Depression, we're linking that mental health side of things. Nutrition, and those on fluid watch as well. So linking those parts of the care plan with must scores and fluid watch into falls. Medication, as we know, is huge. And one that's actually also not in there, and there's probably lots that are not in there because I don't think I have space for it all. Frailty as well. Is frailty looked at? It might be separate, but is it looked at with falls? And we're going to touch on that later. So, as we said, the guidance says we're looking at also the individual's goals, values, beliefs, and priorities. So we should look at that, as well as the frequency, the characteristics, context of the falls that have happened in their history. We know that there are recognisable attributes, as I've said, the ones in green: vision, hearing, foot problems. But what we are missing are things like, as I've said, what that individual needs to do and in what environment. Behaviours, is the person cautious, impulsive, erratic? Why is that happening? And other factors such as illness or absence of usual support. So guidance then, strong recommendations, and you're going to see the strong recommendations all the way through for the next until 3 o'clock. A care plan developed to prevent falls and related injuries should incorporate the values and preferences of an older adult. When creating the care plans, especially those with cognitive impairment, we should try and get both older adult caregivers' perspectives on what should be included, as it improves adherence to interventions and outcomes. So I won't go in any more detail from a risk assessment point of view. I will send it to you again if you don't have one. But again, you don't have to fill it in specifically for individuals, but use it with what you have, with the tools that you have, to ensure you've considered all risk factors. So once we've looked at the risks, we then look at the interventions, and this is what we're going to follow through with today. So as we said, person-centred, absolutely, because my interventions are going to be different to yours. We want to ensure that actions are evidence that we can improve severity of injuries. So again, what we discussed at the beginning of the week. We're looking at the bigger picture. So rather than just equipment in place that might alert us when somebody's up and about, or just reminding staff for people to use equipment, we need to look at that person's overall health and well-being. Triangulating across care plans, so bringing things like activities of daily living across, mobility, movement, engagement. How do we get people involved in the community? How do we get people battling isolation and loneliness? Easier said than done. I get that. It sounds lovely when I talk about it, but let's try and evidence what we can try and do, and we can try and encourage. Be proactive in what you are doing. So there will be lots of things that you're doing that you might not link to full. So we want to make sure we celebrate the good stuff that you are. And following this evidence-based information is only going to make me happy. So that's what I want to see, you know, within the whole county, are things like exercise, are things like bone health. How do we get people in being enabled? Because it's not only falls, but it's those better health outcomes. Okay, so fear. Over to you to begin with. Fear. What happens? You can use the chat box. What happens when people are scared to move or they're scared to fall? What are the types of things that you see? So use your chat box. Let me know what you think. Louise, yes, I will send it to you later on, the triangulation tool. So we've got Michaela, refuse to mobilise. Yes, same. Deb, you said the same. They can stop moving completely. Deconditioning. Belinda, that's a brilliant word. That's a hot word in the county. Deconditioning. They stop getting up for food and drink. Absolutely. Yes. And then we're looking at even more bigger problems on our hands. Yeah, mental health, because the fear can affect, you know, our mental state. Absolutely. Imagine how scared people are. And then it affects our abilities. Absolutely. Good stuff. And we know this can get bigger and bigger. That fear doesn't stop at mobilising. It can get bigger and bigger. Good. And if we think about that mobilising fear, we could, you know, fear of not only eating and drinking, but going to the toilet. Fear of just generally taking part in activities of daily living, so independence. Becoming hesitant, yes, absolutely. So becoming unsure as well, which can affect us mentally. Absolutely, good answers, everybody. Good stuff. So fear is a huge one. Experienced by up to 50% of older adults. Oh, we've got frustration as well. Yes, how frustrating must it be if you're scared? Absolutely. And then we've got potentially that anxiety coming in. So yeah, totally. Okay, something that we can look at, there's evidence there towards it, is that actually when we know about balance, right? We know balance can improve our confidence, it can improve our falls risk. And our fracture risk, because actually a low one leg stand, so you're standing on one leg and holding on to something, actually if somebody cannot do it for 10 seconds, it increases their risk of fractures and predictor of fall. So when we think about balance, it's not only just that falls risk or that fracture risk that could reduce, it's actually that confidence that can come with that can increase. Now, if somebody's scared, they're probably looking down at their feet. They're looking at where they're going, which means their spine will start to become even more flexed, more bent forward. Now, again, the evidence suggests that any curvature of the spine is increasing risk of falling. Low confidence, as you've said, deterioration in physical function, physical activity, increased fractures. Mobility, you know, all those things that you've said physically and mentally. So what we need to do is we need to break the cycle, and it's hard. We have to motivate, we have to reassure, we have to try and do more, but do more safely, and of course complete those risk assessments to address and minimize the risks. So the strong recommendation is, again, from the guidance, is that we assess fear using the fear efficacy scale. And I'm going to go through that with you shortly, about assessing concerns for specifically falling in care homes. It's a bit specific, this one, but fear is something we should all be looking at no matter the setting. Because if there's a cycle, right, and we have to try and break it somewhere. So there's a fall, there's a fear of falling again, there's less activity, there's decreased muscle strength and balance, all falls risk factors, and then there's increased risk of falling again on top of it, and it just continues. So this is the Fear Efficacy Scale International. I will send this to you, so you'll get it in an email. You'll get a PDF. The beginning bit is an introduction, so how you would start this questionnaire, and it's a 7-item questionnaire, and it measures the fear of falling and the concerns about falling. And it is being, again, this is recommendation, so it's evidence-based. So you tick, you tick the box which is closest to somebody's own opinion on how concerned that they might be. So you've got those 7 items there to do with everyday activities. Have a little read, and I'll go through the scoring and what that means. There is a longer one, but the short one is also recommended, so it's okay to use. Okay, so the answer options. How concerned are we? Not at all the way to very, so 1 to 4. So how we add this up. To obtain a total score for the short, the questionnaire, I call it FESI, add the scores on all the items together. So to give a total, that will range from 7, which is obviously 1 point per question, which doesn't have any concern, to 28, which is that severe concern about falling. So you can't use this if there is if there was more than one item that you can't answer, because then it doesn't make it a valid or reliable tool. If there is only one you can't answer, then what we do is we calculate the sum of 6 instead of 7. And then we divide it by 6 and multiply by 7. So then we get a new sum score rounded up to the nearest whole number. So you then just do it by, we can't do less than 6. I will send this to you, so you'll have the slides to read this again. So as I said, if data is missing on no more than one of the 7 items, then we calculate the sum score of the 6 items that have been completed. So adding together again, divide by 6 and then multiply by 7. So fear of falling, we can look at it. We should be documenting it. And then what we're doing to improve it is through breaking that cycle. And something that we can do to help with that is through person-centered interventions. And one of them I'm going to go through is goal setting. So the recommendation, as we know, is to incorporate the goals of an individual. And I want you to think, how many of you have specific goals in care plans that get looked at regularly, that get reviewed, that involve the individual in your care, and actually have a focus on improving quality of life, that have a focus on how people can improve because they can? So what we're promoting as part of prevention and enablement is smart goal setting. It's very straightforward. And we teach this on all of our education. So we've got specific, clear and specific goal for that individual, and that will be different for everybody. Measurable. When goals are measurable, it tells us that when a goal or action is complete, and it helps us track progress. Achievable or action. So to be successful, we need control over those steps and to be able to achieve that goal, of course. Realistic. we stay motivated and avoid overwhelm or unnecessary stress if we're trying to reach something that is just not realistic. That's stressful. And then lastly, putting a time on it. So what is our end goal? And you could have something really long term within, it might take a year, or short term goals that are within that year, but specific to function and quality of life. And it's something that we're looking at within Hertfordshire, is to ensure that goals are in care plans. They're not just general, I don't know, John wants to maintain mobility. What does that mean? How? When by? What do they want to do? Mobilise to do what? So let's be specific. So after today, maybe just look at a few people within your service and maybe look at if we can start to change those care plans and add those goals in, because you're meeting the evidence, and we're also looking of how we can improve people. Because it can help us celebrate the great stuff that happens. And I'm sure you do meet people's goals, but where's that written? It can give people a purpose every day and can motivate, give a focus to improve, involves the individual, and it's part of prevention and enablement. So what we can do to help with these goals is to practice balance, practice mobility. So the strong recommendation for balance and mobility is to include the promotion of exercise training when it's feasible and safe, of course, and as part of our interventions. So we know that supervised exercises in care homes as a prevention strategy is effective, but you have to be trained for seated exercises and standing. Standing can only be done one-to-one unless you are trained specifically. Programs likely to be the most effective when individualized to functional abilities and preferences are seen to be the most successful. So they can incorporate a combination of exercises, including balance, strength, but as well with activities of daily living, of course, staff training, environmental modifications. But everyday movement, as we know, is so beneficial still. We know that in the community, again, balance exercises being part of a falls prevention plan has got the evidence written all over it of how it can prevent falls. And there are classes around the county to look at. But we want to try and support this balance and mobility practice. So we do have exercises available for you to do on a one-to-one. We have chair-based exercise qualification as well. But think about, activities of daily living. Can somebody stand up more often? Can they do more through personal care? Can they carry out tasks around the home? So practicing balance and mobility should be included in falls interventions, and links back into fear, because how are we actually going to decrease that fear if we don't try and mobilize, or we just keep somebody sat down all the time? So in your chat box, give me some examples if you can think of any. Are there any that you can think of that practice mobility and balance? Cool. So standing to put a foot into trousers, absolutely, or any type of kind of personal care, getting dressed, absolutely. Good. Anything else? Good. Yeah, exercise, as we know, huge part of practicing mobility and balance. Good. Yeah, chair base, helping with meal prep, absolutely. Instead of making somebody that cup of tea or that lunch, what can they do as part of that? It's only going to save you time in the future. Good examples. Anything else? Yeah, chair-based. Won't help with balance, but it helps with mobility. Walking around, yeah, having designated time to practice that walking. You could have a wheelchair behind someone. You could have a couple of members of staff either side. So that person has reassurance to sit back down if they need to. So you're not taking away their stable, equipment, their bed, their wheelchair, whatever it might be. So having that designated time, making it part of your everyday, because that is care. So make it part of planned care. Link it into falls prevention. You could have sit to stand, so standing more often. You could have ensuring somebody answers the doorbell when you arrive, so you're not always using the lockbox key or whatever it might be. There's lots of things that we can do. Of course, do your risk assessments. Of course, look at that person's ability. We want to maintain to be safe, of course. And of course, mental capacity comes into it. We cannot make somebody do something they don't want to do. But what we can do is evidence that maybe we've tried and that we're linking to what they want to do with their goals. So another recommendation for you from the guidance, timed up and go. Now, this may be on actually some of your falls, your electronic care systems. So what this is it's an assessment for walking speed. It is not clinical, so anybody can do it. It's a 3-meter walking test where an individual, they can use a walking aid. So you've got 3 meters marked out. You might have 2 chairs. The timer starts when the person lifts up, their bottom lifts up from the chair. They walk 3 meters. They turn when they get to the chair. They turn and they walk back. And as they sit back down again, the timer stops. Now, of course, it's not always appropriate for everybody, but it is looking at risk of falls and risk of frailty. So the timing has been a little bit, there's not always a clear answer on the timings with this test. 10 seconds is seen to be a good walking speed, or sometimes it's 10 to 12 really. Anything above that towards 15, you're seen to be risk of falls. 15 plus, risk of falls and frailty. So it helps measure the walking ability, and it's part of that falls assessment because of walking speed and balance and gait. And it can help us determine when somebody has reduced mobility by how much, and also show positively any improvement. So if you've been practicing mobility with someone, could they achieve a timed up and go now? So we should be looking at this as part of our monthly risk assessments at where somebody's at with their walking. Because what I hear all the time is things like, well, they're slowing down, they were walking, now they're not. Well, why was this not identified quickly or earlier? So it's part of the recommendations, part of the evidence to look at walking speed as part of falls and frailty. So bone health. We know sitting all day can affect our bone health. Our bones are alive, they're kicking, they get stronger as we use them. We want to load our body weight onto our bones. Now, we have risk of osteoporosis, osteopenia. Osteopenia is the stage before you get to osteoporosis, where it might not be critical that bones break. It might not get to critical levels, but osteoporosis, we know it can. So we think about severity here as well of injuries. So what the recommendations show is that we must look at nutritional optimization, including food rich in calcium and proteins, as well as vitamin D supplementation. There are, where this money comes from, either families will have to look at buying, individuals themselves, and it's not, always prescribed now. And those who have had a hip fracture, we need to look at preserving that bone health so we don't get, severe injuries again. So again, exercise. How do we improve that individual? How do we get that person mobilizing, linking in with their goals? So for example, standing up, balance, walking, stairs as a prevention strategy. So if you've got anybody that has had a hip fracture, this is prevention. This is showing you're proactive. So let's really look at this, what you could do. And a question I have for you is, do you monitor the type of movement every day, what somebody does? You might not always know if you're in the community, but you might have a good idea that somebody doesn't move that much. If you're in residential, let's monitor it. Let's make it part of planned care. Could they stand, or I wrote strand, but stand more regularly or practice more mobility and balance? It's part of everybody's care. It prevents that fracture risk. It supports the management of osteoporosis. But again, it links into so much of the falls guidance, but also the, balance and mobility, bone health, severity of injuries. So one thing we can do is good sit to stand practice. So when I say to staff, right, how do you support somebody up from a chair? They say front of the chair. I say yes. Feet flat. Yes. We want 90, 90, 90 with everything. So, ankles, knees, hips. And they'll say, push up. They push up with their arms. And I say, that's going to be really hard for people, isn't it? If you think you don't have that much strength, or maybe you're scared, you have that fear, that's going to be really hard. So what we should be doing to help break up sedentary behavior, it's also a movement we should all be doing, is standing up with the correct technique. And we do this by using our legs. Now we use our arms as well, but instead of just pushing with our arms, we press our heels into the floor. So by pressing the heels into the ground, keep your toes down, you activate our bottom muscles. We use most muscle groups in the body. And it discourages the legs from, if we only, it disencourages the legs from working if we just push up using the arms. Of course, don't pull up on a frame. And it could just be disabling somebody because we focus on the upper body. So something like this is just a way that we can cascade this down. It can actually help even somebody have the confidence to go to the toilet, stand up from the toilet themselves. And I've heard that firsthand from people who have really focused on this with an individual, bit by bit. Not saying you're just going to conquer fear or you're just going to conquer balance and falls, but it's a starting point. It's baby steps. So instead of pushing through the arms, we use the legs, we use our bodies, we enable the strength in our legs. We can get stronger, and we can get that confidence, and it becomes an easier movement for somebody to do. So I'm going to slide through this because of time. I think you all know by now the benefits of physical activity. I sound like a broken record, and I dream about it most nights, to be honest. It's huge effects of how it can make us healthier, overall outcome. So there's a few bits there that you can read. It is part of falls prevention. So if I don't see exercise, if I don't see balance, mobility and plans, I'm not a happy bunny, because otherwise we get that decline in bone health and functional ability. So the guidance, it refers to this guidance in the guidelines. We should be aiming towards 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity. If possible, it's not always possible, but if somebody can be more vigorous with their intensity, then that should also be part of their routine. Moderate is anything that gets your heart rate lifted slightly. In addition, older adults should do muscle strengthening activities on 2 days or more a week. That could include chair-based exercises with resistance bands. But those at risk of falls, we know need to be doing that balance and strength training. So standing up, that coordination, practicing that balance, even if it's just for a few minutes here, a few minutes there, it will add up over time. We know doing some physical activity is better than doing none. If adults are not meeting the recommendations, then anything will bring some health benefits. As I said, a few minutes here, a few minutes there, but having that real focus in the day. So we can start with small amounts and then gradually increase. And then older adults should be as physically active as their functional ability allows. So of course, as long as we're keeping it safe. And we can adjust it. Same with people living with any disabilities, we can adjust it, but the guidance is actually the same. So here we go. Limit the amount of time being sedentary, replace it with more activity of any intensity. So there's lots there. So what I've spoken about a lot, what you could use the chat. Is there anything, what activities could you promote to prevent that sedentary behavior? I've given you a few examples. Let me know if there's anything else that you could do. Indoor sports, definitely for the more vigorous types of things, absolutely. I will make sure that I'll send you, there's a website called Moving More, and you could put in your postcode and it comes up with all the activities that happen in the county for different age groups, different likes, etc. So that's a really good site to use. So I'll make sure I send that to you. Chair dancing, chair yoga, absolutely. Walking, totally. Even if it's just a walking club, or that there's Hertfordshire health walks that you can go on for any ability. Table games, yeah, totally. You've got movement with your arms. Yeah, good. Swimming, good. Just taking trips out, absolutely. But movement, we still want to focus on that movement. Standing more often, as we've said. Activities of daily living, gardening, dancing is brilliant. People love dancing. Helping with personal care, as we said, is all part of that. Gentle stretching, absolutely. So Parkinson's, we know that it comes with huge falls risks. People, living with Parkinson's. Strong recommendations, again, from the guidance. Older adults with Parkinson's at an early to mid stage with mild or no cognitive impairment should be offered those exercise programs, including balance and resistance training. So that could still be seated with resistance bands, and balance and standing where possible. We know that there are many people living with Parkinson's that may also have dementia as well. So again, we want to focus on activities of daily living, any type of movement, as we've already spoken about. Stretching, better posture, enabling people to still live independently. We should also consider offering exercise training, as we know, targeting balance and strength to people who are in their more complex phase of Parkinson's. Of course, physiotherapists, Parkinson's nurse will need to be, will need to refer to. Consider the history of falls as well. So when the freezing of gait happens, the slow gait speed, could they do a timed up and go for us to really evaluate that walking? when do they fall? Is it before their medication? Is it, after their medication? How are they in the mornings? They're different times of day, considering when they take it. We know medication is hugely important for those with Parkinson's. So we know that it's a first step ensuring that we can minimize side effects if possible. But again, falls prevention exercise interventions to be integrated with general mobility, general promotion of independence, activities of daily living, rehab, are huge parts of it too. So, focusing on how we can promote that independence, still with that enabling side of things, is everything we want to see. It's you looking at that whole picture. But of course, we know, that people can also be living with additional complex health conditions. So it's looking at that person holistically. Little bit around dementia. Because of how, falls can just increase so much. Of course, we've got to look at environmental risk factors, what might be quite stressful or cause any distress for people. Lifestyle in terms of diet and nutrition. So we really want to look at weight loss. It might be that they prefer specific foods, finger foods, etc. We want to try and push the nutrition and hydration as part of prevention. Let's really record, in detail falls incidences. We've got determining what is prioritised and acceptable to the adult living with cognitive impairment. So attitudes to those risks, because we know sometimes there is, there's no winning. If they're walking with purpose, have we looked at tiredness? Have we looked at fatigue? Is that evidenced within your risks? Is there a particular time that this happens? Same with sundowning. Again, for community, for people living in the community, dementia, again, exercise is your evidence here. To perform exercise, even with mild cognitive or moderate dementia. So even with mild cognitive impairment or mild or moderate dementia. But again, in care homes, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying to also do exercise. If structured exercise is not suitable, I say it again, we evidence the activities of daily living. We look at activities that they enjoy, your reminiscence, your music, how we reduce the severity of injuries. And ultimately, we focus on person-centered care because we focus on ability, not disability. And we must make sure staff are aware of different types of dementia and how they affect people, because everybody's different. So what I hear all the time, I heard it the other day on training, is, well, people with dementia, they can't follow instructions. And I said, well, that's not everybody, is it? So we must have an understanding of different types. Frailty, associated with increased falls risk. The guidance on here is not so detailed. So if you want to know about frailty, you'll have to come onto one of my courses. But we know frailty is associated with more injuries because it's about how somebody ages well. So it can include those hip fractures, because frailty is a marker of a higher falls risk. It's part of that. If there are 2 or more falls, if they're risk of frailty, it's something that is going to put them, higher up with that risk. So first thing is a timed up and go. We want, first thing is your multifactorial risk assessment, looking at a timed up and go. Looking at risk of frailty. So there are things that we can do to look at risk. It is a diagnosis, so we can't diagnose frailty with someone if you're not clinical, but we can look at the risk. We want to look at level of activity, engagement, withdrawal, exercise, the amount that they are physically active in the day is a huge part of frailty. Surprise, surprise. If an individual is having recurrent falls, that's part of frailty. So we should be looking at that. Because ultimately, if somebody's becoming more vulnerable, less resilient over time, then they're not going to get back to their baselines, and it makes it more difficult for you. So we want to focus on active lifestyles, nutrition, mental health, and looking at how we age and how we age successfully. You could link it back to people's goals, preferences, what they like to do, getting people stronger. But what the guidance says is that further work is required to develop on how we incorporate frailty into the management of older adults who fall, and whether there is anything that will reduce risk of falls. But for me, it says it all here, right? It's around that prevention. So it's around those outcomes. It's around that prevention and enablement. So as I said, we're likely to become more frail the older we are, but it's not inevitable. It's not an inevitable part of aging. So it's how we age with time, disease, and disuse. And unfortunately, the more that complex conditions and diseases people are living with, the more that can, of course, increase their level of frailty. But also, if they're not using it and they're also losing it, then disuse comes into that as well, and that's part of human frailty. But come and if you want to join me on the Falls and Frailty Champion, we spend 4 days going through it. Medication. So last few bits from me. I know it's been a complete information kind of throw at you, but medication review. The strong recommendation is, of course, that medication review and appropriate deprescribing of falls risk increasing drugs, also known as FRIDs, should be part of falls prevention. We recommend that in long-term care, so in care homes, nursing homes, etc., it should always include a rational deprescribing of falls risk increasing drugs. We want to ensure that staff are aware of side effects of medications. It is not normal for somebody not to be moving sedated for the day. Might not mean they're falling, but it's no quality of life. Let's use a questioning approach to ensure that medication is checked, rather than that person's just been like that, or it's had a proper falls. We've looked at it under a falls umbrella. I'm going to show you a fantastic resource in a second, and I will send it to you as well. But we want to make sure what I show you is actually could be on med trolleys, offices, part of staff training. And the document I'm going to show you highlights the falls risk increasing drugs. It highlights the cause and contribution to fractures. So anybody that's risk of fractures or got a history, we should really look at the meds. It's not straightforward. We know this because of what people are living with, and also with frailty too. So it does require a balance between the risks and benefits of multiple treatments. And that's, of course, why we need support with it. So there is this big document that I will send to you. But what it does have on here, and it's all about falls and meds, is a whole list of medications. If I go up slightly, this is lots of references. Here we've got a whole list here. And if I click on a medication, quetiapine, it will take me to quetiapine. You can, of course, print this as well, which should take me to it. Where is it? Here it is. Okay, just above. Here we go. We know it's red. It's an antipsychotic. It can sedate. It can cause slow reaction times, impaired balance, can cause a type of hypertension as well. And what the AEC is the burden, the score of what this drug can do, and how high risk it is. And you can read about this in this document in a lot more detail. But what I would say is have a read of this, possibly link, is there anything you need to question with your frequent fallers or anyone that's fractured, back to the GP or back to the pharmacist? Do your staff have awareness of med? So let's put that as part of workshops, training, etc. And make sure that it's not just, well, you know, that's how they've always been, because I've heard that before, and that means that person, and then that person gets taken off medications, and suddenly, you know, they're actually living a better quality of life, and they've been like that for years. So we should question. And I will send this to you. Oh, good timing. I'm impressed with myself. So I'm going to leave you with a last slide. Is a quote. You might have heard me talk about this before, from a judge when we're talking about risk. We know that all life involves risk, and the young, the elderly, and the vulnerable are exposed to additional risks that they are less well equipped than others to cope with. So, but just as wise parents resist the temptation to keep their children metaphorically wrapped up in cotton wool, so too we must avoid the temptation to always put the physical health and safety of the elderly and the vulnerable before everything else. So it will be appropriate to do so, but not always. Physical health and safety can sometimes be bought at too high a price in happiness and emotional welfare. The emphasis must be on sensible risk appraisal. So we think about being risk positive, looking at people's wishes, likes, you know, their goals, what they value, but not striving to avoid all risk. So whatever the price, we have to seek that proper balance, being willing to tolerate manageable or acceptable risks as the price appropriate to be paid in order to achieve some other good. In particular, to achieve the vital good of the elderly or the vulnerable person's happiness, what good is it making someone safer if it merely makes them miserable? So linking back to a very first slide this morning when we looked at goals and values and person-centered care, it comes into falls prevention as well. So we are done for today. Couple minutes till 3. I can breathe now. You're going to get an email tomorrow, which is just a generic email going to go out, and you're going to get a toolkit of all of our resources and the recordings of the webinars. You'll get a specific email based on today. Again, everything I've spoken about and recording and the slides. But of course, please, you know, come to me if you want to chat more about falls, if you just need to brainstorm. I don't specifically really give advice on individuals, but I do want to make sure you're evidencing the right stuff, the good stuff at your service. And we got loads of education available to you, fully funded. So as long as you are, you know, your membership's up to date, please come and see us at HCPA. Champions are going to be happening every couple of months. We've got falls and enabling education together for a day. Exercise, but as we know, prevention is a whole load of care topics. So no, I've got, somebody's asked if they want do I want email addresses? No, we have them, so you'll get from your sign up details. Any questions, anything else you want to add in the chat, please feel free. I'll stay on for a little bit longer. But if you're happy with everything, please feel free to log off. But I hope it was useful for you. Mel, is the Prisma still relevant for frailty? Yes, it is. For only older adults, it is. So you've got the Prisma that is for risk of frailty, and we talk about that more in some training. But yes, we do have the Prisma there. I don't think it was mentioned in the guidance actually, but that's because it's frailty specific and not falls. But it is there as part of risk. You're welcome, everyone. So Jane, is all the info on the Falls app still relevant? Yes, it is. So we've got our assessments will lead you back to the website. We haven't got all the new resources on the website yet. So that's on my list to do. But everything else is relevant on there. Definitely, you can see exercises, etc. Great for families. Monica, you missed the first part of the 18th. There's the recording been sent out. So if you registered, you should have got an email, but the email that goes out tomorrow with both webinars, you can see the link from there. Oh, thank you. Appreciate recommending the app. Yeah, it's still going. Dominique, you had already started when I joined. Did I receive your details? Yes, because you've got on, so we would have accepted your registration. So yes, I will have your details. Okay, I would just wait a couple more minutes if there's anything else coming through, but please feel free to drop off. Perfect. Thanks, everyone. I will end the webinar now.